we are heartbroken at the knowledge of how basic human rights and freedoms, in primis, religious freedom, are being trampled upon. In no way can we remain silent before such injustices and the different forms of persecution we see. We must stand strong. We must love the world. For God so loved the world that he sent his only Son to save it. But we must not kneel before it, as Jacques Maritain prophetically wrote decades ago.
That's Francis Leo, soft in form and very firm in the background. When he took office as Archbishop of Toronto in the Cathedral of St. Michael the Archangel, he presented himself to the faithful without aces up his sleeve, without reservations, as he is, and with an unquestionable spiritual leadership and personal security that somehow surprised his own and strangers. Francis Leo received his episcopal ordination a few months earlier in Montreal and appointed auxiliary bishop, where he was not the main pastor of the diocese, but in Toronto he was.
Forgiveness of sins, do this in memory of me.
We look a little closer to get to know this 53-year-old man who in some way reminds us of the Spanish cardinals, Bastillo and Cobo, the Italian Marengo or some of his companions on the cardinals list such as Reina, Macricas or Cuvacad, all of whom have gone from priests to bishops and cardinals in record time. Francis Leo was born in Montreal in 1971. He lived in Little Italy or Petite Italy. He is the second child of Italian immigrant parents. His parents came to Canada as teenagers, in the 50s and 60s. He himself points out the enormous influence that the Italian way of life has on him.
I consider it a grace and a blessing to be able to be born and raised in an Italian family in Montreal, where we kept the traditions of the old country, the language, customs, and those wonderful values of family and hard work and faith and helping one another and trying to achieve excellence, and so these are the sacrifices of our parents and grandparents. Remain with you always.
Under that appearance of a slow, measured, excessively calm, approachable and smiling man, there is the Francis Leo passionate about God, the Church and humanity. He speaks sweetly, but with great authority and without squeamishness, in the sense of elevating the listener. In him it is common to hear expressions in Latin to emphasize ideas. He goes to the origins that he draws from his very deep knowledge of the sources and tradition of the Church.
So it's no secret that for many of our contemporaries, we're living in somewhat chaotic times with strife, hardships, and anxiety. I've been meandering somewhat on the state of affairs. I turn to the perennial, age-old wisdom found in the monastic tradition. Plunging into the depths of those masters of the human soul and of the human condition, allow me to share some of the golden nuggets I discovered in my spiritual mining exercise. Was the realization that there is an antidote to the many and destructive kinds of polarization. Have you noticed how all around us there are people who feel invisible, unheard, and lonely? Now, St. Benedict begins his rule, the prologue, with the beautiful and touching words, "Listen, my child, to the instructions of the teacher, and attend to them with the ear of your heart." The original Latin is beautiful. "Obsculta, o fili, precepta magistri, et incline aurem cordis tui." To listen with the ear of the heart.
In chapter 8 of the Book of Wisdom, King Solomon recounts his search for God's wisdom. I loved it and sought it from my youth, and I sought her as a wife, in love with her beauty, with 8:2. Knowing the life of Francis Leo gives the impression that this verse in him has become life. This bishop describes his relationship with the faithful as a betrothal, a marriage that is the fruit of his commitment to God and to the Church.
Since my ordination to the episcopacy, every day I reread the 9 promises that a bishop makes during the rite of consecration. One of these 9 promises in part reads, "Do you resolve to guide the holy people of God in the way of salvation as a devoted father?" In fact, one of the symbols which is given to a newly ordained bishop is a ring. It's my wedding band. It signifies a covenantal bond, a true marriage.
With Cardinal Francis Leo, we meet a man who speaks about the usual: holiness, Christ, Mary, salvation, sin, conversion, saints, church fathers, culture of death, life, dignity, love, intercession, devotion, piety, virtues, parish life, community, eschatological truths, prayer, discernment, spirit, sacrifice. However, there is something in him that makes the usual sound different. Why should it be? It not only sounds different because others do not speak in such a natural way about Catholic essences. What makes the difference in this pastor who aspires to holiness and preaches about it? Francis Leo's melody is so different, so joyful, so full of faith, harmony, and hope that it is worth both following it and, perhaps, to write down his name with a view to the next conclave. Intertwined with his life itinerary, we discover a highly balanced and bold personality. His academic curriculum is powerful and his ministerial career rich and varied. A priest who has had the opportunity to be immersed in different areas: parishes, professor of philosophy and theology, formator of seminarians, spiritual accompanier, active member of the diplomatic service of the Holy See, organizational and with leadership skills as Secretary General of the Canadian Bishops' Conference. In this way, the incessant pastor has become congeal in his activity. His diocese, Toronto, is the largest in Catholic Canada, with 2 million Catholics and a variety of nationalities that, like New York, Mass is celebrated every Sunday in 30 languages. His incessant work of preaching, whether oral or written, stands out. He sends pastoral messages assiduously in a friendly, direct, catechetical style and with a particular emphasis on teaching features of the spiritual life, the growth in the virtues, in the love of God in a way that is as traditional as it is original, is concrete and persuasive. We prefer Christ to politicization, devotion to cunning, grace to hatred, truth to ideology, he wrote in the pastoral message for devotion to the Sacred Heart. Several aspects help us to get to know this great shepherd better. 1. Maturity and discernment. 2. Cardinal devoted to Mary. 3. Francis Leo's gestures, his piety. 4. Their firmness in the fight against evil, particularly against abortion and euthanasia. 5. Determination against polarization. His elevation to cardinal has not gone unnoticed in his native country, Canada, which right now has 3 cardinals for the next conclave: Lacroix, Archbishop of Quebec, already known on this channel, and Cardinal Thomas Collins, former Archbishop of Toronto and still an elector in the College of Cardinals. 2 scenes catch our attention that make us see how Cardinal Leo is regarded. A senator and a deputy in the National Congress publicly expressed their joy as Catholics for their promotion to the cardinalate. Unthinkable discourses in countries such as Spain or Uruguay, and so many others, where the complex of Catholics, on the one hand, and the black shadow that looms over Catholicism make it impossible to see it naturally in supposed democracies. However, in Canada, even though it is a nation devastated by secularization, it is possible to listen to the humus of Catholics with respect.
You see, Archbishop Leo is a family friend. To us, he's always simply been known as Father Frank.
Mr. Speaker, this Christmas season, our Catholic community here in Canada and around the world was blessed to begin this period of prayer and preparation for the arrival of Jesus Christ at the heart of St. Peter's Basilica, when Pope Francis inducted 21 new members into the College of Cardinals. Among them, one of our very own, His Eminence Frank Cardinal Leo of the Archdiocese of Toronto.
Thank you. Merci.
In a 2023 interview for America magazine, the Cardinal tells how he discovered his vocation and what influenced him. I felt the call to the priesthood and said yes when I was 15 years old. My involvement in the parish community, to get involved in the service of God. I felt called to be an altar boy. And then the scouting, the choir and all that. The second key moment was prayer and accompaniment. The priest said to me, "We all have two vocations, the first to holiness and to service, which is the universal call to holiness. The second is the personal vocation." Thus, it wasn't me trying to figure it all out by myself. Jesus had already figured it out. The way was to connect with him and ask him. And my prayer changed. No longer as something egocentric, but Christocentric, seeking his will for me. He says that before entering the seminary he had doubts about whether to become a religious or a diocesan one. He dedicated himself to reading the lives of founders, of saints. He questioned everything. His inclination was for the Dominicans. He liked to be contemplatives and conquerors. Finally, in 1990, it became clear to him that he wanted to be a secular priest and entered the major seminary of Montreal. I like the Dominicans because they seem to me to be like the Jesuits, a good mix of contemplatives and active, of Thomas Aquinas, his good sense. Faith and reason are not enemies, they work together. I was impressed by the witness of Saint Dominic, a man who responded to the needs of the time, and by Saint Catherine of Siena, an Italian member of the Third Order of Saint Dominic, and her work for the renewal of the Church. Today, he is an associate priest of the Dominican Third Order. Francis Leo is the Marian cardinal par excellence. The Virgin Mary is the backbone in this young cardinal. His doctoral thesis was on the Virgin Mary in the preaching of Savonarola, a friar of the 15th century. In addition, of the more than 70 cardinals known so far on this channel, he is the only one we have come across specializing in Mariology. His specialty is not only theoretical from theology, but incarnated in life and preaching. With the Archbishop of Toronto, the most important dates of his life, all of them, are marked by the presence of the Virgin Mary in one way or another. In 1996 he received priestly ordination on the feast of St. John of the Cross, December 14th. Leo is a man as spiritual as he is studious. It is not difficult to imagine that he knows the Spanish saint and poet in depth. In this regard, he claims that his favorite places to retire and be with God are monasteries. In fact, he is about to open another monastery in his Diocese of Toronto. In relation to discernment, we have already seen that from a young age he provided the means to make the right decision and discover God's will. In 2006, the nuncio to Canada invited him to join the diplomatic service of the Holy See. Leo comments that at first he hesitated and had qualms. "I was happy with my pastoral work, especially with families and young people. My two loves were the parish and teaching. I had my doubts, but in the end I said to myself, well, if it doesn't work out I'll go back and decide to join the diplomatic service." After his time at the Pontifical Ecclesiastical Academy, this man who speaks Italian, English, French and Spanish, had assignments in Bangkok, Australia and Hong Kong. His mother Rose died young, at the age of 61 when he was in Australia. For him it was a huge loss because he was very close to her, as he is today to his father. In 2012 his life changed and he entered a kind of ministerial crisis. He began to doubt whether or not he should continue in the diplomatic service. The spark went off after talking to the Bishop of Montreal. They commented on the needs of the diocese and he had doubts because, according to him, in that conversation with the bishop something was rekindled in his heart. He wondered if diplomatic life was really what he wanted for the rest of his life. He returned to the bishop and he made him see that he could make the decision he wanted, but that there was the seminary around the corner and he needed formatus for the seminarians. Leo comments, "I truly believe in the power of prayer and discernment. It was a difficult discernment to make. So I talked to people of faith and wise in the ways of the Lord, and to my spiritual director, who was a Jesuit. And then it became clear. It became clear, and that's why I felt happy. His doctrinal thesis, defended in 2004 and which dealt with the sermons on the Virgin Mary in the preaching of Fray Geronimo Savonarola, reveals other traits of Francis Leo. It is a delightful text for lovers of the history of the Church, of the changes and tints of popular piety over the centuries, and above all to read masterful paragraphs on true devotion to the Virgin Mary. Among many traits, Francis Leo is a positive man, extremely delicate. It is impossible to hear from him negative situations about people of the Church. He expresses his closeness to Pope Francis, but he is realistic and does not shy away from dealing with and analyzing the great problems both inside and outside the Church. His style is distinguished by charity and prudence. In his doctoral thesis he addressed a controversial character, Savonarola, saint or heretic. He was accused of heresy and executed by the Inquisition of the 15th century. Leo confirms that the fiery friar Savonarola was a colossal preacher, that he was not a heretic but extremely orthodox in doctrine, but that in addition to being apocalyptic and reforming, he was an undisguised accuser against the Pope and the Medici, denouncing their corruption and moral deviations. In Savonarola, two things failed: disobedience, something that does not happen with saints, and an excess of angry zeal. Erroneous attitudes that also occur today in many sectors of the Church. Discernment on how to act with charity and truth is not easy. Perhaps the answer is to be found in meekness and purity of heart, and it seems that this style of Francis Leo, unlike Savonarola or the many fiery Savonarolas that sprout in some Catholic environments of the 21st century. In 2022, on February 11th, the feast of Our Lady of Lourdes, the Vatican announced the appointment of Francis Leo as Auxiliary Bishop of Montreal. Cardinal Francis comments that he was frozen, that he did not expect that appointment. He chose as his episcopal motto, "Do whatever he tells you," from the Gospel of St. John chapter 2:5, where the wedding at Cana is narrated. And as it could not be otherwise, he was ordained bishop on another Marian date, September 12th, the feast of the sweet name of Mary. As we said before, Cardinal Leo is known for his gestures. The small details speak to us of a pious, conscientious person, focused on the here and now. He is a man attentive to piety. He bows his head when pronouncing the name of Jesus Christ during Mass. After giving communion, if he gives the ciborium to a deacon to take it to the tabernacle, he kneels. But if there is one gesture that he has made normal and that stands out above all, it is that he preaches with the crozier. It is not usual to see other bishops always preach crozier in hand. What does it tell us about him? His conscience as a pastor, and that he embodies what the symbols represent. The bishop, when he preaches sitting on the chair of his church, his cathedral, he always does it with a mitre on. It means that as successor of the apostles they have the power in preaching. They are the teachers in the preaching of the Word of God as part of their episcopal ministry. And the crozier? The crozier is the symbol of the pastor's authority. Authority that he assumes naturalness.
Christ in the Eucharist by Eucharistic devotions, that is, like the first Fridays of the month, benediction. We come to Jesus, who's truly, really, substantially present, and we put ourselves in front of him, face to face.
A few months later, we are already in 2023, another unexpected bombshell for Bishop Francis. The nuncio calls him and confirms that the Pope appoints him Archbishop of Toronto. His reaction was, "Are you kidding? No, it can't be," and that he was speechless. Thus, on another Marian date, March 25th, the day of the Annunciation of the Virgin Mary, he took office as the new Archbishop of Toronto, a diocese of great pastoral vigor, particularly focused on pro-life activity, both in preventing abortions and in combating legislation contrary to human dignity. The commitment of the Canadian bishops against euthanasia is admirable. Implementing palliative care programs to try to alleviate the ravages of euthanasia. Finally, on December 7th, the eve of the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, Francis Leo was elevated to Cardinal. This pastor is authentic. Follow his track and learn from his teaching. from a man who is governed by prayer, by the devotion of his son to the Virgin Mary, who lives his pastoral dedication as a father of a family, where only the affirmation of Catholic truths deserves confidence are glimpsed in him. The next one will be his first conclave, and only God knows if perhaps also the last one.
Porque solo Dios sabe quién entra como cardenal y quién debería salir elegido como el 267 Papa de la Iglesia Católica para liderar parte del siglo XXI.